Hello, welcome to the latest edition of Business Spotlight. I'm joined today by Chris Maslin, who is the founder of GoEO. Welcome to the call, Chris.
Hi, Gavin. Thanks for having me.
Chris, you're welcome. Tell me a little bit about what it is you do and why you do it.
So what I do at the moment, very much helping businesses to transition to employee ownership. So that generally means talking to the founder of the business or the current owners and helping them to understand why it can be beneficial for them and the whole business to sell to the employees.
Well, that's quite a specific thing that you do. Give us a sense of the background. How did you get to this point in your business life?
Sure. So my background's in accountancy and tax, quite a standard and often considered dull thing to do. I built my own practice starting in 2008, and it grew slowly and steadily over the sort of 12, 13 years that followed. A couple of years ago, I sold a controlling stake to an employee ownership trust. So at the time, the business was turning over about £1 million, had about a dozen staff to give you a rough idea of the size. And I'm not at retiring age, hopefully fairly obvious, but I think from my perspective, I was getting a bit bored with it. And a real downside of that is that I don't think I was that inspirational leader that perhaps I once was. And I think it's important for the staff that the person who's leading the business is really driven and really wants it to grow and succeed, and that's someone that they want to follow. And it was getting to the stage where the senior staff were more excited about the future success and growth of the business than I was.
If you don't mind me saying so, that's an incredibly honest and self-reflective reply that you've come up with there. You're effectively saying I wouldn't have employed myself at that stage in the business, but you were passionate enough to want to see the business succeed and continue. So you must have considered various options. What dissuaded you from stepping back completely, perhaps, and selling, the 100% stake in the business?
So I think in terms of other options, I might have had a trade sale would have been the obvious one, the standard thing that someone in my position might have done. A bigger competitor would swallow us up, absorb our client base into theirs. That didn't appeal at all, to be honest. It possibly would have been marginally more financially lucrative for me. But I was well aware of the fact it would mean the brand would disappear, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but it's a bit upsetting. I think a lot of the staff would probably been told they'd either have to relocate or be made redundant. And I think that would have been a bitter pill to swallow. The people that I've been looking at in the eye for years and years, and all of a sudden I walk off with a load of cash, and a lot of them have a pretty rubbish situation. So that didn't appeal. The employee ownership trust, one of the beauties of that, without going into too much technical detail, is that the staff as individuals don't have to put their hands in their pockets. So that's a key difference between it and a management buyout. In a management buyout, you're asking your staff to go to their parents or their bank or the piggy bank and find money to buy you out. With the EOT model, employee ownership trust, it's effectively the business profits that pay you out. So it does mean that in the short term, whilst the staff gain the benefit from profit shares, they might be quite modest because it's sort of like the first chunk of profits will be coming to me and it's only any excess above that. But longer term, it's theirs without them putting a penny in. And like I say, longer term, they'll be able to get all the profits from it.
But they have all the incentive of putting the effort in and being part of the growth of the business.
Very much so, yes. I think that the Employee Ownership Association recently ran a whopping great survey, and the headlines were basically that it proved staff engagement is better in employee-owned companies, productivity is higher. I can't remember. They had percentage statistics with evidence to back these up. I can't remember the numbers, but yeah, the staff know that they will benefit from any ways that they improve the business, so they're more likely to be a bit innovative. Come up with new ways of doing things. They're more likely to work a bit harder as and when it's required, rather than thinking, meh, not my problem, I'm just going to go home at 5 o'clock.
What's interesting in this is that you're describing the various stages of the business and essentially saying I got to one stage and realized that I wasn't the best person for the job at this point. When somebody sets up a business, and we'll come to the new business that you set up in a minute, but you kind of do so with a superhero mindset, don't you? You put in the work and all the effort that it takes to get it off the ground and make all the personal sacrifice to make it work, etc. And then you start to build a team around you, and it's all about shaping that team and shaping the culture and where you want to take the business. And then you get to the point where there are things that are going on in the business where people may have better skills than we have as the people are starting up. And at that point, you looked and said, well, actually, this is probably the right time now for me to go and do something else. But in terms of the transition, how did you sort of sell the idea, if that's the right word, of the employee ownership trust as the best option for the staff that are already there? How, rather than the technical details of it, what was the process that you went about to kind of inspire people to have a look at that as an option for themselves?
So at the time, I had a conversation with sort of the three most senior staff there, who I felt between them had a lovely balance of strengths. So like I say, between the three of them, I thought they really had what it needed to take the business to the next level. I explained sort of, in simple terms, what it really meant, and also, as importantly, what it didn't mean, because I think there can be a few misconceptions about it. Because the absolutely critical thing is that those three were on board with it. There is an element that the rest of the staff, it's less important. To be quite blunt, the more junior staff are a bit more replaceable. But those senior staff, if they decided, you know what, Chris, we don't like this idea, we're not in favour of it, then I wouldn't have been able to proceed with it, because potentially, I could have done the deal. They then say, no, I told you I wasn't happy for this. Right, I'm off. I'm going to go and get a job elsewhere. And then very quickly, the business is in a lot of trouble.
But now you're poacher turned gamekeeper. So you've now set up your own business where you're working with other businesses to say, this is something that you can do. So is your approach very much the same? How do you approach this idea about, I suppose my first question is, how do you find potential audience and clients for this concept? How do they find you?
So I suppose on that final question, how do I find clients? That's something I'm still very much finding my feet in myself. So, I've had that big debate. Do I try to find the business owners directly? Do I try to appeal to them with the marketing? Or do I think, you know what, let's try and appeal to accountants who will have a client where they might feel like, I think this is suitable for them, but I don't know enough to do this. So I'll then bring in GoEO to do that transaction. Again, possibly also business brokers with a similar kind of mindset, that they've got someone on their books who they know wants to sell. Either they can't find a trade buyer, or the client likes the idea of an EOT, well, that's where we could come in. So at the moment, I suppose I'm sort of banging a lot of different doors to see what might work. Okay,
all right, that makes perfect sense. I mean, you're describing in rather crude terms the two forms of marketing, which is hunting and farming. So hunting is when you go looking for your prospects. Farming is when you kind of generate that reputation and the case studies that people think, oh, this is something that I'm already aware that I would like to do, and then they come in your direction. It takes time to build that. So I'm assuming that you must be quite passionate about this as a niche. This is something that you want to pursue and develop for yourself, because when you're working in an area that is it's not the most common form of business transactions and selling, which gives you the advantage of working in a niche, but then of course gives you the challenge of, in a niche, where does one find one's customers and clients and how best to serve them. So I guess the question buried in all of what I've just said is you're being driven by your passion right now, and you're working out the details as you go along. Would that be a fair comment?
Yes, I mean, I'm running a new startup business, and like you say, a lot of that is fumbling around. Hopefully some things work, some things don't, and you adjust your path accordingly.
Okay, so in terms of looking to the future and where you might want to take the business, what's the pathway that you're following? Where do you see this developing for you? Because there must be a massive audience out there, Chris, I would imagine, for the opportunity for people to look at this and not even be aware, perhaps, you don't know what you don't know, that actually this is an option for some business owners who might be thinking, I'm a little bit tired, I got to the point of my business where I've put in the energy, I've done the work, I don't want the business to change substantially, I want it to continue its character, I want to defend the interests of the team that I've got working with me, and hadn't really occurred to them this is a possible option. That's where you're looking, isn't it? That's the space that you're operating in.
Yes, I mean, I think awareness is a problem. It's one that not really due to me, but is gradually being solved, I think. So there's a few like high profile businesses that have done this in the last few years. So Richer Sounds, you know, the hi-fi and TV seller, Aardman Animation, the people behind Wallace and Gromit.
Oh, really? Okay.
Go Ape, the sort of aerial assault courses. So yeah, there's a few others that are, you know, pretty much household names that have sold to an EOT. And because they're household names, they've made the national press, they've made it on the news, etc., etc. Whilst they're obviously a world away in terms of size and scale than the business that I sold and the kind of businesses that I help, it does at least help get the message out that this is an option, and it's also perhaps a sort of trustworthy option, to be one of a better phrase, because I think, you know, some of the perks of an EOT for the founder, you don't pay any capital gains tax. It's pretty much the only thing I can think of where you can sell the business and not pay capital gains tax. But one of the issues is you say that to people, you know, to business owners, and their thoughts are often, oh dear, this sounds like a dodgy tax avoidance scheme. I don't want to get involved in this. And then you find, like, you know,
Avoidance scheme. Yeah.
Yeah, there's an element of, is this too good to be true? So there are some downsides of EOTs, and you know, we want to be open about this because I feel like often if you explain the catches, then people are a bit more inclined to believe it in general. So the main downsides compared to a trade sale, you do often get paid out over a longer period of time. And there is perhaps more of a risk that if the business does collapse, you might not get paid the whole amount you were supposed to. So the key thing with that is it's critical that you, as the founder, who may or may not be exiting in terms of your work, but even if you are planning to disappear, that you make sure as best you can that that business is on a really stable footing and will carry on to do well for multiple years after the sale.
You see, it seems to me, Chris, that part of the challenge of the work is actually education. You know, and I giggled when you said, you know, because it's ignorance quite often where we take a situation, we compare it with something we know a little bit about, and we know, for example, that not paying capital gains tax is usually a dodgy thing, without actually understanding that it's, you know, there were perfectly legal financial frameworks with which businesses operate, but most of the time the business owners don't know what they are. So your challenge is really perhaps around educating people on the ideas, using the case studies such as Go Ape and, you know, Ardaman and the various others that you've mentioned. And then people go, when they can see it in what other people have done, then they're thinking, oh, well, actually, this is obviously legitimate and above the board. What might it look like for me? And I guess that's where you step in.
Yeah, and I think we're getting to that stage, and I can't remember what the curve is called, but you know, we have the innovators, the early adopters, the late adopters, and the
sigmoid. It's the sigmoid curve.
That one. I think we're definitely beyond the innovators now. So we're probably still in the early adoption phase, but I do feel that means that the numbers of these transactions really are starting to ramp up.
Yeah.
Because increasingly business owners will know another business owner that has done it. And as soon as that starts to become the case, you'll be thinking, oh, right, okay, I know that person, I trust that person. You know, they're not trying to sell me anything. I want to hear from them about how it worked, good and bad. You know, what were the pros, what were the cons? So that's really helping with the awareness point. And then the key thing that I'm trying to do is basically make it more affordable, because up until this point, it is something that generally you need to go to a law firm because you're selling a business. So you know, you've got your mergers and acquisitions, your share purchase agreement. You're also creating a trust. You need a trust deed for that. You typically need accountants to value the business. You potentially want tax advisors because there's clearance requests, there's stamp duty submissions, all this kind of thing. So it is the kind of thing that for a business at the smaller end, when I say that for employee ownership, I'm sort of thinking maybe 5 to 25 employees. I wouldn't quite say it's prohibitively expensive, but it's certainly something where it makes you think twice if you're perhaps going to be, you know, spending almost half a year's profit on the professional fees to get this done. So yeah, key thing we're trying to do is make it as streamlined as possible, whether this is considered an offensive term or not, but I've heard it being phrased as IKEA-izing it. So if you want a coffee table, you don't go to a master carpenter, ask them to cut down that specific tree and do it bespoke for you. You go into IKEA and you say, I want that one. I know loads of other people have the same one, but we know it works. It's good, and it's a decent price.
I think that's a very clear analogy. So if I was to ask you, for those for whom it was appropriate, and we know it's not appropriate for everybody, but for those for whom it is appropriate, etc., what would be the three key benefits perhaps that you would want to suggest for EOT to business owners?
So I think the main benefit is the legacy and the staffing. I'd kind of put that in one as a whole. So I think if you're a business owner and you care about that, and I'm certainly not judging people who don't, I totally understand for many people, a business is a route to make money. That's all it is. It doesn't have a personality, and that's absolutely fine. But if you want the business to continue, you want it to continue to employ people locally, you want it to continue to buy from suppliers nearby, part of that community, and EOT can be one of the best ways of achieving that. If you're going to sell the business, it's where trade sale might do those things, but certainly there's a lot more of a risk. So I'd say that's benefit number one. Benefit number two, let's be honest about it, the tax perks. So for the selling shareholder, you do need to meet a few criteria, but you can have it that the sale is totally tax-free for you. Or I say totally tax-free, there's no capital gains tax.
Yeah.
And also on the tax perks for the staff going forwards, where they get profit shares, the first 3,600 per employee per year can be tax-free. So there's another little tax perk there. What's a third one? I suppose it's the staff engagement side, which is something that's very hard to measure directly or to prove. But there is some evidence that suggests that, where all the staff collectively own a business, they're all going to try that little bit harder. They're going to think a little bit more outside the box and just try and make the business a really lovely place to work, rather than having that vibe of, why should I work hard or try and do anything because it's just that fat cat at the top that makes all the money off this.
I think that's really clear. And I think it's great that we've got this opportunity to, sort of spread the message a little bit, through this vehicle, through this means. And I wish you all the success in the future. Young businesses are difficult, they're challenging, but they also can be really, really rewarding. And I've learned something from you today, so I always consider it a great interview if I learned something as well. So thanks very much, Chris, for your time today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gavin. Cheers.